After a heated debate, Toronto City Council has backed off a plan to legalize sixplexes citywide. Instead, they now only will be allowed in the former city of Toronto, East York, and one ward in Scarborough. Other parts of the city can choose to opt in later. Earlier, I was in studio with David Clement from the Consumer Choice Center about what this means for housing and zoning in the city. David, what was being proposed at Toronto City Council and how was it amended?
So what was being proposed would be a citywide, as of right, sixplex zoning change. So if you rewind, let's say during the pandemic, around 70% of the city of Toronto was something called exclusionary zoned, which means that you could only have one housing unit on each piece of property. The original proposal was to say for each piece of property, you could have up to 6 housing units. Um, how it was amended was essentially just limited to specific wards, with giving other wards the opportunity to opt in. So we didn't see the city-wide border-to-border change that was originally proposed. And that has rubbed a lot of people who care about housing the wrong way, because being able to go from 1 unit to 6 units on a particular piece of property could substantially increase the housing stock in one of Canada's most expensive cities.
How did Mayor Chow respond to that? And do you agree with her response?
It was pretty weak. It was pretty weak. It more or less seemed like she caved to what I would call the not in my backyard councillors who wanted the amendment. And what's really disappointing is that she had the power to get this over the line and didn't use it. And when I say the power, I mean it in two ways. She could have more effectively lobbied for it and urged council to adopt it. And two, if they had gotten over the 30% threshold in terms of councillors who would have supported it, she could have used her strong mayor powers, which is something the Ford government has introduced for mayors, really for circumstances like this, saying that it's not 50% anymore, you just need 30 or 33%, whatever the specific is. And then the mayor can essentially rubber stamp it. And so it was within her power to actually get this over the line, and she failed to do so.
How would sixplexes help the housing crisis?
Well, it's just a rapid increase in the potential for housing availability. So it's called the missing middle, where you have, right now in the city of Toronto, you have predominantly single family homes and huge condo towers. And single family homes are increasingly unaffordable. Condos become more inconvenient if you're a young family or a growing family, just because there are only so many people you can fit into a 2-bedroom condo. And so this is the missing middle that housing advocates have talked about for a long time. So this would have helped bridge the gap in between those two housing options. It would have increased supply, or potentially increased supply, maybe put some downward pressure on prices, or at least calm the increases that we've seen over the last 8 to 10 years. And so it's a huge downfall for people who care about trying to increase livability and affordability in the city of Toronto.
Now, you've mentioned that critics are quite opposed to what's going to happen in Toronto. Do you agree with the critics?
No, I mean, you see this happen where people will say, well, what if we don't want a sixplex next door? It's not your property. You don't own your neighborhood. And I can understand there may be irritations or grievances about that, but at the end of the day, it's not your property, and it's ultimately the decision of the property owner as to what should go there. And it really bothers me when we see people who advocate for housing affordability. They know that the housing crisis is a problem, but when a solution pops up on their street, they become, well, not in my backyard. And caving to that mentality is in large part not exclusive to the city of Toronto, but in large part of the reason why Canada is so unaffordable when it comes to home prices, rent, you name it.
Well, will there be some sort of mandate put on these new homes to help with the affordability crisis as well as the housing crisis? Or right now, is it just the housing crisis that's the focus?
The idea is that it's both, right? If you increase supply, naturally that brings down, so long as there are demand measures, so long as demand isn't outpacing supply, you then have downward pressure on prices. So from an immigration standpoint, we've seen that fall off nationally with efforts to curb immigration to try and calm things down. That's to limit demand. If you are limiting demand while increasing supply substantially at the same time, you're taking one big step forward in terms of calming the housing crisis, bringing prices back down to reality, putting downward prices on rent, and most importantly, offering a variety of housing options rather than the dichotomy of single family homes, which nobody can afford, and condos, which people may not want.
David, thanks for the time.
Thank you.